Welcome, John, to the World XP podcast. This is episode number 13. It's a pleasure to have you on. It's been a while since we've talked to each other face to face. We've been messaging back and forth here and there, when the Sixers are bad or when Miami is bad or when both are bad. Because, over the last 5 to 10 years, both teams have had some rough patches to say the least. But here we are in the NBA Finals, and my Heat are not looking so good, but it was kind of to be expected a little bit, I feel like.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Yeah, it has been a while. Like you said, unfortunately, our teams are not in the best of situations in the NBA. But at least your Heat are in the finals, so congratulations.
Yes, it'll be congratulations until we lose Game 5, and then we'll be going home.
Hey, there's a chance.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the last two games, we made some matchup adjustments and some other things. Like we were talking about earlier, I watched the first 2 games and we got killed the first 2 games. So I stopped watching for Game 3 and then we won. And so then Game 4, I was like, oh, well, let me not watch again. But unfortunately, the superstition didn't pan out in the way that we would want. So since I didn't watch and you did, I think you caught the last sort of 5 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the things that you saw? Do you think Miami still has a chance to pull out another game or so?
It's very hard to see them pulling it out. I can see them winning another game, and I predicted that the Lakers would win in 6 games. But with LeBron James and Anthony Davis performing as they are, especially when Anthony Davis scores 30-plus points, you can't beat them. It's almost impossible. So if Tyler Hero can perform some magic while Goran's still out, unfortunately, and Bam steps up, there's a chance.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was saying before the series. I was talking to one of my friends, and I said, for us to have a chance to win between Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero, we need 3 big games between the 2 of them, like 30-plus point performances between the 2 of them. And we haven't got it thus far. And here we are in a 3-1 hole. But I think it's kind of to be expected a little bit. I don't think anybody really expected Miami to even get here in the first place. So I just had a fun ride watching us through the bubble. The team is, I don't know if you've seen this as well, but the team kind of with Jimmy Butler kind of just meshes really well.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for Sixers fans, because we were literally a shot away from making the Eastern Conference Finals last year before Pascal Siakam decided to hit this incredible 3-pointer with Jimmy Butler guarding him. But I like Josh Richardson and what we got in return. Hopefully he continues to produce and can stay healthy. But as far as Jimmy Butler's role, he's showing this revitalization of life, and that he's this NBA All-Star first-team caliber guard that we knew him to be when he first started out in the NBA.
Yeah, I think one of the weird things with where he came from, Marquette, is Marquette is such a tiny school, tiny Catholic school up in Wisconsin. And Dwayne Wade's come out of there, Jay Crowder, Butler, Wesley Matthews. They've all been the same, like 2-guard or swingman type player. And it's weird. It's a little bit weird for me. I don't know. You've obviously done way more research into sports than I have. But is it kind of weird for you to see one tiny school continue to produce the same sort of like type of player?
It can be weird. It's funny you mentioned Marquette because that's where my younger sister goes.
Really?
And they just a draft prospect they got this year is Marcus Howard. Of course, he tore up NCAA for the past 2 years with scoring average of almost 40 points a game, which is insane.
Yeah.
But schools like Marquette or Davidson, where you got Steph Curry, and you just get these small schools and they produce such generational talents. It's truly great.
Yeah, definitely. I think I both my aunt and uncle went to Marquette, and so when Dwayne Wade was coming out of the draft in 2003, I was like, wherever he goes, I'll like that team because at the time the Wizards were not good to say the least. Kwame Brown
Hmm.
was he was still there, and I think most people listening are familiar with the Stephen A. Smith Kwame Brown rant, which is still comedy gold. If you haven't seen it, please go YouTube it. You will be happy you did.
Hmm.
Um, but from the Sixers' perspective, I know when the trade for Jimmy Butler was made, one of the pieces that I was a little bit sad to part with was Josh Richardson. I've not paid much attention to him since he's gone to Philadelphia, but how's he been so far for you guys?
He's been a good fit. He can really defend. That's what he's most known for. Um, and we were a solid defensive team. Where we struggled though was shooting. And I think where it really showed was that Al Horford signing,
Mm-hmm.
um, to spend almost 100 million and to have him serve as a bench player uh, really hurt the look of that acquisition and our team. So we needed to stay healthy. We were healthy entering the bubble, getting
Mm-hmm.
back into it, but then we were riddled again with injuries. We had Ben Simmons go down during still the regular season play,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had Embiid. He was battling through injury constantly through the end, and then it just kind of all fell apart. And
Yeah.
so they wanted a scapegoat. I believe in Brett Brown,
Mm-hmm.
but Elton Brand has to share that responsibility of blame because he's the one who's assembling the team.
Sure. What was the thought process behind signing Al Horford in the first place? Because I had looked at that, like you guys already had Embiid. Maybe it's a veteran presence who knows how to win. I could see it from that perspective. But was that the thought process, or was there other thoughts behind it as well?
Well, I think um, first it was nice to steal him from the Celtics, um, but I thought they were going to put him back where he started in the NBA at power forward. Um, Usually he's a traditional center,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he played in Boston most of the time. But I thought they were going to pair him alongside Embiid. And Horford's a decent shooter. He can hit mid to outside shots. And so I thought they were going to try and use him as a surprising 3-point shooter uh, for a big man, sort of like Nikola Jokic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he just couldn't do it. And so that was that was a problem. And so Embiid can hit threes, but he's more effective inside and drawing
Definitely.
fouls
Yeah.
and getting to the basket.
He is a I don't think there's anybody in the league that can guard him one on one in the post. Um, but now looking forward, so Brett Brown is gone. You mentioned the injury troubles. I know both of them have been injured fairly frequently. Both of them being Embiid and Simmons. Is there a look to trade one of them or move one of them, or is Doc Rivers? Are you guys going to wait until Doc Rivers kind of gets in and see what he wants to do, or what have you been hearing from your Twitter sphere, other sources?
Well, what I've heard is, well, Doc Brown arrived in Philadelphia 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking to just use what he's got. And he's shown time after time with the countless playoff appearances that he can put together a winning team with what he's got. But that doesn't mean they won't trade one of them. Simmons for a while now has not been able to develop a jump shot or a 3-point shot, which is a problem for point guards.
Mm-hmm.
And so we saw him move to power forward right before he got injured. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see all that much of it. We only saw one game. Um, so if anyone wants to move, I would likely see Simmons. Um, I would like him return a decent shooter, be it Devin Booker, um, maybe a Victor Oladipo, or a Buddy Hield.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who can really shoot the three, get a jump shot, and be that go-to person as Jimmy Butler was last year for us.
Yeah, I've heard. I think I heard on ESPN maybe that the Sixers were looking at Buddy Hield. Would that likely be a 1-for-1 swap from Simmons for Hield, or what kind of package would they be looking at to get him?
I would likely see. It all depends on how big of a package they want to put together. Um, I know the Sixers might be tempted to send Horford away as well, but that's bad salary. So they'd have to package together Horford and Simmons plus some draft picks for Hield. That way they're dumping salary space and they're acquiring a young guard who can shoot.
Hmm. Is that the ideal scenario for you? As like if you were in Elton Brand's position, what would you do if you're Sixers GM and you're playing 2K or whatever? What's the move that you make there?
I I would be very tempted to discuss with Minnesota about that first overall pick, um, and try and acquire Anthony Edwards. I've also heard the Sixers are very high on LaMelo Ball. Now, the Ball family is quite a scene, and Lonzo hasn't. He's been okay, but he
Hmm.
hasn't been that talent that we expected.
Hmm.
So I'd be tempted to trade to Minnesota for that pick, but I'm also but if I were a GM, I'd probably package a 1-for-1 deal with Phoenix, who wants to dump Devin Booker but gets someone else in return. And I think Ben Simmons could be that decent player that they look for.
Is Booker looking for a way out?
Um, Not necessarily. I think he's just looking for a change of scenery. Um, he's been in Phoenix for his entire career, and they've been subpar. And
Hmm.
so when you're in that environment for a long time, it just becomes tiresome.
It does for sure. At the end of the bubble, they looked pretty good though. They were the only undefeated team in the bubble. Do you think that was a fluke, or can they continue that next season? Should the team stay together as currently constructed?
Um, I think they have a chance, but I think it was more of a fluke
Hmm.
because a lot of teams were looking to just stay healthy or stay in the position that they wanted to be in, be it a first seed, second seed, third, and so forth.
And keep the matchups that were favorable to them moving into the playoffs.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So looking into obviously the finals are still going on, but looking into this off season. So Anthony Edwards, you said, um, is he overseas currently as well?
No, he was at the University of Georgia. He's a he was a freshman.
Hmm.
Um, he was the top rated prospect um, of the 2019 freshman class for college basketball. But he had a mediocre season, but he's got a lot of potential.
And is that enough for Minnesota to take the flyer on him at number one? Or
Yes.
is the draft class not that deep this year?
Um, I don't think it's as deep as other years. I think it's really lacking. Um, I think there's a lot of foreign players, overseas players that really have potential. Um, I know this small forward out of Israel. Can't pronounce his name, but his first name's Denny, and last name starts with an A. But he reminds me of Luka Doncic. He's that type of player. Um, Maybe not as good as Doncic because Doncic is incredible right now,
Hmm. Yeah,
but to have that style and sort of game that he does.
I feel like that's fairly common coming out of Europe. That's the sort of game that you can see the patterns there. Even the ones who aren't as successful, like Rubio, for instance, they all have that vision and the flair for a nice pass and that sort of thing. Um, have you put your, because I know you do mock drafts on your sports blog, have you put an NBA one up yet or not so much?
Um, Not really of recent. I've been more focused. Yesterday and today have been the NHL draft, so I've been focused on that. But I'm in the coming 2 weeks or so, I should be publishing another one with comparisons and possibly like strengths, weaknesses, and a more expanded analysis of it.
Sure. Do you want to give us? Do you have a top 5 in mind before we move over to hockey?
Ooh, top 5. Let me pull up my big board. James Wiseman's an interesting prospect for me because he bowed out of Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
He had a little problem with they thought he was taking money.
NCAA violations. I remember hearing about
Right.
that. Yeah.
And so he was the number 1 prospect entering the season, not Anthony Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
But now, since everyone's kind of out of the job or playing basketball, it's really interesting to see how these scouts critique, rank, because they don't have much to look on.
Right.
But as far as the top 5, I still think Anthony Edwards is number 1. I think Golden State has the 2nd pick. And I think they go Wiseman. I think they go with a young Chris Bosh. He reminds me of.
He's a 4.
Well, he was a center at Memphis, but he's got this physicality and this like energy that Bosh used to have.
Okay.
And then I think the Knicks are in there. The poor Knicks. I think they finally, after years of taking point guards, why not another one? I think they take LaMelo.
That would be a fit, right? The Ball family wants to be in, or they did anyways. We haven't heard much from them recently.
No.
But putting them in New York would be a recipe for LeVar Ball to show himself again.
Mm-hmm. At 4, I see Obi Toppin out of Dayton. I saw him actually play when I watched George Mason play Dayton last year, and he was incredible. He took the game into his own hands and just demolished Mason. It was unfortunate for us, but he's a tremendous player. He reminds me of Tobias Harris. When Tobias Harris is on.
Yeah.
That is. When you get postseason Tobias, not so much, but he reminds me of regular season Tobias.
That's not a bad pick for anyone.
No. And then the 5th person is where it really gets dicey, because there are a lot of prospects. I think after that kind of falls off a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And so you could see like an RJ Hampton or a Cole Anthony. Cole Anthony didn't play much at UNC. He only played a couple games, but when he did play, he was very reminiscent of, I'd say, John Wall.
That speed and power and explosiveness.
Right. So that would be my top 5.
Well, we'll see if it comes true at some point. Whenever they hold the draft, probably virtually, I would think. When is it supposed to be? It's supposed to be, I don't even know, in the next couple months or so? Or are they trying to get the regular season started soon, right? Were they going to try and do that?
I believe they were going to try and do it in January, beginning of January.
So that would put the draft in November sometime?
November, yes.
So before we jump to NHL, you mentioned that the scouts don't have a lot to go on, obviously, because they haven't been playing. What sorts of things are they going to go off old tape? Or are they going to do interviews, or what sorts of things are they going to be looking for that would be different in this sort of scenario?
So they'll be looking for a lot of personal videos that these athletes will be making. A lot of athletes nowadays, prospects, they record themselves to show off their talent, be it at a football field, just running, doing various exercises like lifting, or in basketball's sake, it would be shooting hoops or playing one-on-one. So a lot of that. And then also they're going off of past footage where they actually see what they're doing in games and how they think, how they operate, whether they're good under pressure, not good. And finally, the last piece is the interviews, the one-on-one interviews. I think that's the real deciding factor of whether or not a player goes first or if they fall all the way to fifth, because there's that trust that you have to develop between the athlete and the coach and the owner and the general manager.
Definitely. That'll be a tricky one, I think, I think we might see a lot of surprises when we look back maybe 5 years from now on, 5 or 10 years from now, on who really shined out of this draft class. But it's one of the hard parts of being a GM, I guess, is making sure you get your draft picks right.
Yeah.
And you said, so the NHL draft was going on yesterday and today, right?
Correct.
And so I've not been, so my family's a big hockey family. Me, not so much. I watch the Caps when they're on, and I know like who the teams are. But when it comes to prospects, I'd imagine a lot of them come from overseas, and college hockey is not as prevalent as it would be basketball or something else. And so when they're drafting, like what's been your take on the differences, I guess, between like an NBA draft versus an NHL draft as far as scouting, and then like when you evaluate prospects, like when you do your mock drafts, is it more difficult, or kind of, if you want to walk through that sort of process?
So what I do when I compile my scouting reports and my mock drafts is I start an Excel sheet and put in the players' info, and then I start watching footage and start reading reports. I have to be careful of which reports I read, because some people just put reports up, and you have to make sure you get the right information. But differences between the NBA and NHL. Well, the NBA has only 2 rounds, while the NHL has 7. And so there's a lot more prospects in the NHL to pull from than there are the NBA. The NBA is very small with that small roster size. It's not harder to make it in either sport, but to make it on a small roster is very difficult. And so when I am looking at these prospects, I'm looking at whether or not they can fit, they can take that game to the next level. Have they shown improvement? Like, I have to constantly update the reports. And that's what's difficult about, I would say, hockey, is because you don't get as much video footage right now as you do NBA or, well, in this case, NCAA or high school, because there's just so many more prospects and because of the restrictions right now.
Yeah. Is it harder to get footage from overseas guys, even in normal times, pre-COVID times? Is it harder to get that sort of footage from a guy who's playing in Russia or Sweden or somewhere like that?
Surprisingly, it's not. I tend to usually find more footage on overseas prospects than here in the U.S., despite popularity of basketball being mainly in the U.S., I'd say. But aside from usually the top 10 or so prospects that are American, the overseas prospects have a lot of footage and a lot to give.
Is that because are they already playing pro when they enter the draft?
Several of them are playing pro, and they're playing for club teams, like FIFA. And so you got like FC Barcelona, you've got a couple of Israeli teams that are very strong, and same with Australia. But
that's for basketball, isn't it?
yeah.
For hockey though, are they playing pro already, or not the same?
It's not quite the same. You have a ton of leagues, a lot more hockey leagues than you do NBA. You have, I mean, the list goes on and on, but it's a lot of junior hockey and then professional level. So a lot of these players will play junior hockey leagues in foreign countries, like the WHL, the OHL in Canada, before they transition to NCAA, where they continue with those leagues and get drafted.
Is it harder to find footage for those guys, for the overseas hockey guys?
I would say no. Again, it's harder for the Americans. Well, in this case, hockey's more popular in Canada. So you get a lot of Canadian footage. And then also, a lot of the talent for this year's draft class has been overseas. There were, I believe, only one American taken in the first round.
Is that normal-ish?
It usually spikes. Usually there's about 4 to 5 Americans taken.
So this first round, with the Caps, I don't even remember where did they end up?
23rd.
23rd. They were in the playoffs somewhere.
But they traded up, yes.
So they finished in the playoffs and they got their draft spot accordingly. And so they traded up, and who did they grab?
They grabbed Hendrix Lapierre. He plays center for Canadian Hockey League, and he's a star athlete. Unfortunately, he's been sidelined for all until last week with repetitive head and neck injuries that riddled him for about 2 years now. And so he's shown potential. In his past 2 games, he scored 3 goals and 6 points, which is amazing. But again, the unfortunate part and why he dropped on so many people's boards was because of that injury history. And so he couldn't get medically cleared by a lot of the teams.
So is this one of those where the Caps kind of take a chance on him because they have Kuznetsov and they have some other good centers, and so if he develops into that talent like you were talking about, then great, but otherwise that's okay?
Yeah, I think they're in a unique position. They still have a chance to really compete. Ovechkin's getting old, Backstrom's getting old. So is Oshie, unfortunately for them. But as this window is closing, they still have that chance, that opportunity to take a chance on a guy like Hendrix.
So do you see? So I know Ovechkin. I don't even know if he starts anymore. I know he comes off the bench and kind of does spot like power plays and things like that. But would you see for the Caps the window? You'd say what? Maybe another 2 years, maybe.
I would say it will really ultimately depend on how the goalie transition goes. I would say 2 years, regardless. But Braden Holtby's gone. That's obvious now because he's a free agent. So with Holtby gone, an all-star caliber goaltender, they've now got to trade the torch, hand it off to Ilya Samsonov, who had a lot of experience last year playing in net during the regular season, especially when Holtby was not doing great. But he doesn't have any postseason history. He only has about a year's worth of regular season appearances, and now they've got to use him in net, and it's likely that they will sign Henry Lundqvist or King Lundqvist, but he's only got about a year left, and he's been a backup for the Rangers for about a year and a half.
Right. Do you think you said his name was Samsonov?
Hmm.
Has he shown enough in those regular season games? Do you think that would at least keep the Caps in enough games to keep them competitive?
Yeah, definitely. They have a tremendous offensive game to them that even if Samsonov is a little off or a little bit worse than he was last season, that they'll be able to make the playoffs and give a run for that top seed in the Atlantic.
So for your Flyers, so the Caps, you say maybe 1 or 2 seed in the Atlantic Division. Are the Flyers in the Atlantic as well, or are they the Northeast one?
They're in the Atlantic as well.
So where would you put them their season's prospects moving forward in this season?
Um, I would put them in good contention to uh, again make a run for the cup as they did this past year. They really surprised a lot of people by sweeping the preliminary round of the playoffs, the round robin play, beating Tampa, Washington, and Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And they were only 1 game behind Washington for the top spot in the Atlantic before the regular season ended. And so I think they have a young, excuse me, a young team and a lot of talent riding behind goalie Carter Hart and captain Claude Giroux that they can give Tampa, Washington, Boston, any of those guys a run for their money.
So we're looking at probably another competitive playoffs with the same sort of 4 or 5 teams sitting there at the East in the end.
Hmm.
Well, hopefully we'll see. For me, hopefully it's the Caps, even though you probably care more. So maybe the Flyers will pull it out this year. Um, so for baseball, which is your sort of forte, I would say, is that accurate?
Hmm.
So for baseball, we are currently in the playoffs, the divisional round, I want to say.
Yes.
So we've got
Well, it's different because of COVID. You got this weird format now. Yeah.
what's the new format then?
Uh, 8 teams per league, with the top 2 teams in each division making the playoffs with an additional 2 wild cards.
So that would be okay. So yeah, the 8, and then was it just a straight top seed versus eighth seed, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5?
Yep. And the first round was a best of 3,
Mm-hmm.
and this current round is a best of 5.
And then will the conference championship be a best of 7?
I believe so.
And then the World Series also best of 7. So who do we have? Who do we have left right now? Let me take a. Well, I saw the Astros were left, probably because they're cheating again.
Yeah.
It's actually 7-7 at the end of the 7th inning, so it's a little odd. So, real quickly, the Astros cheating thing. For those people who are listening that don't know what the reference was that I just made, and I hardly even know, to be honest, because I just saw a couple of headlines here and there. Would you want to run us through kind of what happened there?
So the Houston Astros, shortly after losing the World Series to the Washington Nationals last year, were found guilty by Major League Baseball for stealing signs, which is a violation of the rule book. And so during the 2017-18 seasons, they were stealing signs from opposing teams by using cameras and recording that footage during games and relaying the message to each other during the game.
So what? So is the bad part there the recording? Because I think if you had some players that would just notice the sign during the game and say, "Hey, they made this sign. It's probably going to be a fastball because that's what it was last time." That's okay, isn't it? It's just the recording part that made it the issue.
Correct. It's the recording, being able to use that footage for that game and then future games really hurts the integrity and the message of baseball and how it's played. Baseball has always been defined as the nation's pastime. Since the late 1800s, it's been a staple of America. And so to really see not only the Astros, but the Red Sox also get charged and found guilty of cheating, and then seeing both general managers and head coaches go down was really a terrible thing to see. It was really embarrassing.
Yeah, for the league, I know I would see that was the only thing about baseball that I saw for a few months. Maybe this is just me not understanding, but do they not? So if they're able to use it for the next game, are you talking about the next game in that like that 3-game series or the next game later in the season? Because do they not change signs like in the middle of the season, or how does that work typically?
So teams will change signs constantly, um, especially with certain opponents, um, like division rivals.
Mm-hmm.
But if you play a team frequently and you know them really well by using cameras and footage, um, it then loses the essence of an actual game because you have this unfair advantage. That's
Sure.
not that's not a part of a sport that you want to be part of.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you say, because I remember when we were growing up or little, it was kind of the end of the steroid era. Um, would you say that is this kind of on par with that as far as a black mark on the game, or
It's definitely tarnishing baseball. Um, like it was hard to see iconic players such as Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, uh, Jose Canseco, A-Rod, all these guys be found with traces of steroid. Um, but this is, I would argue, worse because it's not an individual, it's a whole team that partook in such a terrible act.
yeah, that's fair. I could definitely see that. Like I said, never been the biggest fan of baseball, not because I don't like it, just because I've been interested in other things. But um, if that was things like that have happened before in soccer, like match fixing, and that's a big problem in kind of Central and South America and a little bit in Europe as well. Juventus in 2006, I think, got relegated and got fined because they were fixing matches. Um, and so it's been fairly not constant, but
Mm-hmm.
it's always around the soccer world, and definitely whenever I hear about that, I'm disappointed to say the least. But looking forward into the playoffs, to get back to actual baseball and not scandals as I look up the scores once again. So do you have sort of a predictions of who you think is going to go through and then end up winning the World Series, or have you posted about that? I would assume you have.
So I posted my predictions for the first round. Was not very successful. Um, and I did not post predictions for this next round, although I did make predictions um, to a couple other people. Like the Braves, I said would sweep the Marlins, and right now they're 2 games up in the
They are.
series. hmm Um, I actually thought the Rays would beat the Yankees. Um, I really like what the Rays have shown this season. They remind me of earlier Rays team that made to the World Series, but unfortunately lost to the Phillies. Um,
Oh
darn
no,
luck.
how
Uh,
disappointing.
um, but that team was uh, it was really looked over by a lot of people, but it was a very talented squad. Um, Probably the most interesting series, the Padres and Dodgers. I'd love to see the Padres somehow pull it off, but I don't see anyone getting in the way of the Dodgers and winning in the World Series.
Think the Dodgers are going to win it all?
Yeah.
So what goes into your predictions for these? Because when you post, they're always so detailed. Is it kind of similar to your mock drafts, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I usually use um, the same formats. Like when I do my mock drafts or when I do my predictions, I'll use a same format. I'll state, like, for instance, the number of games in the series, how many games they'll win, um, maybe a player to watch. Um, and so that's what I usually use. I usually keep it short and to the point
Mm-hmm.
because I find that people don't want to read through a long, lengthy report because they don't have the time.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to see, okay, who are we getting in the draft? Who do they think we're going to get? And they like to get excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One thing I have noticed about your sort of predictions and mock drafts and those sort of things are they don't always follow ESPN or CBS Sports or NBC Sports or those sort of things. So obviously you're putting in a lot of your own research into that. Um, do you go off what you see when you watch the games? Do you look up scouting reports? I know that um, some of the leagues have prospectus, big like giant prospectus books that come out at the beginning of every year with super detailed stats. Do you read those, or how do you kind of go about doing that?
So what I usually do is I'll I'll usually watch the footage first, and get my own opinion. Oftentimes I'll watch it without any volume or with something else playing in the background
Mm-hmm.
because you have announcers voicing over, and while they may not try to be biased, they can be. Um, so I like to get my own feel for that player prospect. And then I follow it up by looking at additional reports, usually just through Google. I don't usually buy a prospect book, but I'll look through different reports and I'll stick to sources that I find are reliable or scouts that have a good knack for it.
Interesting. That's good. As probably takes up a lot of time. I would think.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite sort of predictions to compile?
Um, well, any that have a Philadelphia team winning, um, but I would say I really look forward to the beginning of seasons, um, making bold predictions way ahead of when the regular or when the postseason actually comes and when a champion's crowned. Um, I like I predicted Kansas City last year, so that was fun. Um, Finally got to see Andy Reid win that Lombardi,
Yeah, that was
but
good for him.
I like making a bold statement and saying, "Hey, this team or this player is going to be good. Watch out."
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. It probably gets that good, nice, warm and fuzzy feeling inside when you're right, and turns out
Yeah.
you were right. Definitely. So, since baseball's been your forte, did you grow up playing baseball, or was your family baseball fans, or how did you kind of get into that?
So I grew up playing baseball. My older sister played baseball first, before me, just because she was older.
Hmm.
But started off in Virginia Beach playing t-ball for the Dodgers. Um, and then I just transitioned with the age groups.
Hmm.
But I started, my dad didn't really play baseball. Nobody in my even extended family really played baseball. It was mainly soccer and lacrosse. And so when I started getting older, um, to coach pitch and then kid pitch, I was getting really good.
Hmm.
Um, I would play travel all stars for coach pitch and kid pitch, and then we moved out to Washington State, and uh, I again kept succeeding and improving, and so I'd make all star teams, and I'd to a point where I was getting looked at by like high school coaches. So again, that warm and fuzzy feeling. But unfortunately, I had to take a step away.
Why? Why was that?
Unfortunately, in 2007, the summer of 2007, July 26th to be exact, I went to a Red Sox Mariners game in Seattle. Lovely day, nice garlic fries and a cheesesteak. But on the way back home on the ferry, my mom noticed a rash on my skin, and we made our way quickly to Bremerton Naval Hospital, about 15 minutes away from where I had lived.
Mm-hmm.
And random woman just out of nowhere walks by and says, "Oh, that's petechiae. That's a rash commonly found on elderly patients or people with liver problems." And so they immediately emergency vehicled me 45 minutes away to Tacoma Madigan Army Hospital. And later that night, early morning, I was diagnosed with a liver disease called autoimmune hepatitis.
What does that entail, kind of? What is, for people who have no idea what that is?
Yeah, which is probably a lot. So autoimmune hepatitis is this inflammation of the liver in which the liver attacks itself. So when I got diagnosed, I didn't know what was going on, what to do,
Mm-hmm.
what my body was doing. I mean, I didn't have any medical knowledge. I was told to just take these new pills and be careful. So it was a little scary because I was just 11 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so being told that I had a liver disease, I felt like the world was crashing down on me.
Sure.
But over the next several years, and even to this point, I've really learned that there's people with far worse and that deal with their own problems and situations that everyone's got to deal with in life.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great outlook to have. Definitely going forward with something like that. I know so many people are dealing with so much, even just with just COVID now, people losing their jobs and all sorts of family members being sick with COVID and other things like that. There's definitely a great outlook to have. It probably keeps you positive, I would think.
No, definitely.
And so then you ended up moving to Virginia, and it wasn't what, 2 years after that, about?
So while I was still in Washington, in 2009, I was diagnosed again with rheumatoid arthritis.
That's
Again,
normally in elderly people, isn't it?
yep.
So you just got very unlucky, I guess. Is that the case?
Yeah, I found my way into Benjamin Button's body. But I was diagnosed with that, and that's when I really was forced to take a step away, and I had to stop. Is because my bones and my cartilage were just deteriorating, and so I couldn't run as fast as I once had. My strength had started to go away, and I was noticing subtly, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to compete, and I don't want to be on the bottom tier looking up. I want to be on the up end looking down.
Yeah, of course.
And so that was in Washington State. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, I made my way out to Fairfax, Virginia, where I spent 2 years there.
Mm-hmm.
Had a couple of medical stumbles, like a couple seizures out of nowhere, of course. But that's when, again, 2 years later, I made my way where I am now, Ashburn.
So your first year at our high school was your first year senior year, or was it junior year?
No, it was 10th grade. We had
10th grade,
English
that's right.
together.
That's right. I remembered it was English. I didn't remember which year it was though. Yeah, I remember first meeting you, and you were super into sports. I think we got along quite well a little bit.
Yep.
But I remember we would like play basketball at the gym, like during PE or whatever, and I could always tell that you wanted to play,
Right.
and people would try and convince you to play. I probably tried to convince you to play multiple times, and
Yeah,
I
but
think being high schoolers, we just didn't have an understanding of what you were going through, really.
yeah, it was a difficult time. I mean, it wasn't difficult at that point, not until really senior year, because I, for some reason, couldn't really move. I didn't have the strength, didn't have the
Hmm.
capability, no matter how hard I tried.
Yeah,
And
I
so
remember that.
I had to move around in a wheelchair, and even the second half of my first year at George Mason, I had to do the same thing, which was difficult because people look at you. I mean, it's just a fact.
Hmm.
And so it's difficult, but you learn how to really take it in and just deal with what you have.
Definitely. So what is the sort of, are there treatments for these things, or are they kind of more just managing the pain, or how does it kind of work for you? Because obviously you're not in a wheelchair now. Last we
Mhm.
talked, even before we talked the other day, um, as we've been talking, I know you haven't been in a wheelchair for quite some time. So things are obviously a little bit better, at least.
Yeah, so I would say since my second year at Mason, or like 4 years ago, yeah, I like to take the long route. Um, Things have been better, especially this past year. I've really upped up my strength and started working out daily. Um, so that's really improved. And so as long as I keep moving,
Hmm.
um, I'm good.
That's good because it. So when you, let's see, sophomore year of high school, you were moving around pretty well, I think, from what I remember.
Yeah.
Is that true? And then it kind of went a little bit downhill as we went through high school, and obviously, like you mentioned, senior year you're in the wheelchair. So when you went down into that, like downhill into that, was it because you weren't moving around as much as you could, or did the sicknesses kind of just take the turn that way, or?
Yeah. So with my illnesses, there aren't really any long-term or there are long-term treatments, but there's no cure. Um, so for years we've been trying to perfect this like recipe for how much prednisone, how much of this medicine, how much, and so um, it it really just took a turn for the worse, um,
Mm-hmm.
at a again out of left field, but it it really made me think like, hey, uh, what am I doing when I have this strength, when I have the capability to walk, to run, to use it, but also I've got to be, I got to know what my limits are.
Sure. Has that been kind of a work in progress as well the last few years?
Yeah.
So what does a normal sort of workout for you look like?
Um, so usually, I'll stretch first
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, and then if it's a nice day, um, I'll just spend an hour and a half shooting hoops in my driveway. If it's not nice, and even when it is, I'll usually head down to my basement uh, to do some bench press, and then sometimes a couple days a week I'll run for a mile,
Mm-hmm.
and then I usually finish up before I go to sleep. I'll do 50 to 100 sit-ups.
Good. That's solid, man. That's solid. It keeps the muscles firing,
Yeah.
keeps your body solid. I think with the liver one being a immune or immune disease, I guess, is have you found it with COVID? Are you kind of under like, hey, I should definitely stay home all the time now, just to be safe?
Yeah. Um, I it was difficult at first with COVID. Well, at first actually it was a sense of relief because I I'm limited, but this was a time in which everyone was.
Hmm.
So it kind of evened out the playing field. But then after a while it became hard because I hadn't I hadn't gone further than my driveway. Um, and meanwhile, my sisters um, were going out to get groceries about once or twice a month,
Hmm.
and I felt like, hey, you're getting to do these daily activities or these common activities in our daily lives that we once had. Um, but I wasn't understanding, hey, they're also risking their lives because
Yeah.
every time you walk out and go to a public area or store, you can get uh, the virus, and
Hmm.
it, we all pretty much have immune or immune disorders.
Your sisters do as well, you mean?
Uh, all except for my oldest sister and my mom.
Hmm.
She has a thyroid disease, and same with my younger sister Abby, and Katie's still trying to figure out her medical issues.
One of your sisters just got engaged. Is that right? Did I see that?
Yeah, that's Megan.
Well, congratulations to her.
Thank
Hopefully,
you. Yeah,
hopefully it turns out to be a fun wedding. Hopefully COVID
a
has gone
fun
away by that point.
fun Zoom wedding.
Yeah, fun Zoom wedding. So, are you kind of have you kind of figured out sort of a routine in where you're able to kind of get out and move around and not feel uh, threatened? I guess is the right word by COVID.
Yeah, I've luckily been able to get out a little bit more because of the nice weather.
Mm.
But also, I've had a couple of medical visits at Bethesda, um, and I have one, in fact, tomorrow and Friday. Um, but even though I'm going out, um, it's just nice to do something.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I know I've been coaching some soccer and playing some soccer. Um, and without that, I would definitely be going insane for sure.
Hmm.
If I was not going past my driveway, I would be. I don't even know. I mean, doing the podcast also helps to get to talk to
Yeah.
different sorts of people and reconnect with certain people. But um, yeah, dude, that's been rough for everyone, I'm sure. But
Hmm.
so you're. Hmm, let's see. So I know there's not really a cure, but are the treatments you're getting, are they kind of just more management at a little bit at this point?
Yeah. So I've been managing it for pretty well now for the past 2 years, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I get a yearly infusion of what's known as Rituxan, and that helps my arthritis, which is my main issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I was shooting hoops the other day, 2 days ago, for too long, and right after I finished, I felt like a pain in my back,
Mm-hmm.
like I had pulled something.
Yeah,
Um, but the Rituxan, once it kicks in, it'll really help.
that's good. So is the situation you found yourself in, is that kind of one of the reasons why you wanted to be a sports writer?
Yeah. Um, it was because I could connect with sports while being disabled.
Mm-hmm. So moving forward a little bit, what's your kind of end game goal if you had to pick a dream job? What would you be doing?
Um, if I had a dream job, it would be probably covering uh, baseball
Mm.
with Buster Olney, or being a sideline Analyst for games. Just to be there in person and to be able to travel at the same time would be fun.
Definitely. I think your passion definitely shows in your blog. I think people talk about sports all the time. Like every bar conversation ever, at least somebody talks about sports. But I enjoy reading your blog or your posts on Facebook just because they're so detailed. It makes me feel like I'm reading a legit, like, not that you're not legit, but like a big name like news outlet, with the detail that you put into it and the time that you put into it, like watching all the footage, like you were talking about before. And so have you kind of figured out a way to break into that a little bit, or is the blog a way to break into that, or or do you have a plan? I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but you kind of have a plan for how to get there.
Well, I'm going to see where the wind takes me, as many people, especially who will be re-entering the world and job field market over these next several months. But I connected with I've connected with several people in the past years, but where I really connected was with my professor, Charlie Castlery, former general manager of the Washington football team. But he was my professor this past summer. Really taught me a lot of insightful things. And he connected me with two other people. One with the Hawks, the Atlanta Hawks, and then another with George Mason Athletics. And so through them, I'm hoping to connect even more and spread.
That's good. That's definitely a good start, especially with the Hawks. So, like, that world is so small once you're in. Just you're 2 phone calls away from like a Mark Cuban or a Steve Kerr or whoever before you know it. Everybody seems to know everybody from somewhere. It's a real small world. Soccer's the same way. Some of the guys that I coach with are like 2 phone calls away from like Ben Olsen, who's DC United's head coach. And unfortunately, they have not had a great season, but that's okay. But yeah, the sports world is super small. I feel like it's difficult to break in, but once you make the right sort of connections, you're kind of not good, but almost there. The connections are, I don't know have you found similar sort of things?
Yeah, I found different connections over different sports. Like I posted on Instagram this one issue. I can't even remember it, but it was like Jerry Rice in a fried chicken commercial and how it was racially insensitive. And out of nowhere, he just messages me.
Jerry Rice messaged you?
Yeah. He comments on the photo and I'm like, whoa. And I'm like clicking like, okay, is this really his profile? No, but he was like right on and he was like agreeing with me. So that was nice. And so I get like that. And then at the same time, I've got like, a couple of years ago, I got my wish granted as a Make-A-Wish kid, and was GM of the Phillies for a day, where I met Ruben Amaro Jr. and got to shadow what he did on a day-to-day level. And so that was,
I remember
really
that.
cool.
You posted about that on Facebook, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing something about that. I knew as soon when I saw that post, I was like, that was probably the happiest day.
Yeah, it was one.
So what did he kind of get to? What was that day like when you did it? Because Make-A-Wish is through ESPN, and so do they get in contact with you and say like, yeah, we picked you, and then kind of how does that work?
So they send out what are called wish granters. So a doctor referred me, and so after years, they finally accepted it, because it's a great charity, but at the same time, there's tons of kids who deserve it.
Sure.
But after years, the wish granters reached out to me and were like, hey, we're ready to grant a wish. And so that was cool. And so I had to start thinking of ideas like, hey, do I want to go to the Super Bowl? But as I thought of ideas, there's also problems, because like there's certain events where you can't get into, or for a certain amount of time. So like I'd wanted to go to the Super Bowl or be like sidelined to the NBA All-Star game, but that wasn't for like 4 years.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I can't do that because by the time I do it, I'm over 21, and that's their age limit.
Right.
And so I decided, hey, I really like the Phillies. I really like managing and putting together teams. And so I was like, GM. So I was like, I want to be the GM for a day. And so they made it happen, and it was a really cool experience. I got to see all the big boards in Mara Jr.'s office. At that time, it was leading up to the draft.
That's
and they
probably
were
an
looking
exciting time for you.
Yeah, there were tons of names. And then also I got to bring my sisters and my family, so that was cool. And I got to choose out like, which camera do you use? Do you use the Kiss cam next? Do we use the do we use the 70s cam? And so that was a unique experience.
When you were in the room with the draft board, had you already started doing your blog by then?
Yeah, so I had started my blog in 2014.
And you went
16 or 17. It's all blur.
So did you recognize the names on the board? Were you like, hey, I know that guy. I've watched some of his games.
I recognized about 2.
Really?
I wasn't as big as I am into analyzing and really doing draft profiles of every prospect.
Because I was gonna say, if you did that now, you'd be like, hey, you should draft this guy because I know all about him. But yeah, you're good. That's awesome. That must have been a great day. Probably if I had to pick something like that, I would probably pick a similar sort of thing, except for soccer. And then they finished off with the game, and then you got to pick the cameras and stuff. That's cool. You could probably have some funny experiences, funny stories to tell. Be like, hey, you should put the Kiss cam here. Were you able to tell them where to put it, or just which one?
Yeah.
You were?
No, just which one.
You could have found some awkward looking people and like put it there.
No, I the awkward Kiss cams.
That's funny. Yeah, I think we've done almost an hour and like 20 minutes or so already. Where can we find your sports blog at?
So just simply Googling Johnny Sports Blog, or Johnny Sports Blog blogspot, or johnnysportsblog.blogspot.com.
Sounds good.
Is the full URL.
Sounds good. We'll get that link in the description, obviously. What kind of stuff if people go visit your blog, what kind of stuff should they expect to see there?
Mainly mock drafts, a few draft profiles or prospect profiles. Every off season before training camp, I do an NFL who to watch for, as far as which players to watch for entering the training camp for every team. And then sometimes I'll put up something random, be it predictions or unique story that I find. Like, for instance, last night with the last pick of the draft, it wasn't the Dallas Stars. It was the San Jose Sharks, I believe. It was one of those two teams. The presenter signed the pick so that the pick's mother could understand since she was deaf.
Oh, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice touch. Oh, you mentioned NFL. We forgot about NFL. Let's go into that just for a little bit. We won't have to talk about the Eagles because you promised that I wouldn't talk about them. But
that was just the Sixers. We're in first place
with a losing record, of course.
And we play Pittsburgh.
When is it? Is it really?
Yeah.
Some fan I've been. The only thing I remembered is that we weren't going to play the Titans because they had players test positive for COVID. But that'll be a good game. I'll message you before and after, depending on how it goes.
It's gonna go your way.
We can only hope. So, what's your sort of? Have you done a playoff sort of prediction for the NFL?
Well, with this whole world it is today, I still did make predictions. I predicted the Chiefs to repeat. I just really believe in Patrick Mahomes and this offense that they have with Tyreek Hill, Markle Hardman, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's just Travis Kelce. I mean, the list goes on. And then they have this defensive line that's incredible. D Ford, Chris Jones.
Yeah.
And then they have the anchor with Tyrann Mathieu in the back. Yeah. It's a very solid lineup.
They're a good group for sure. I wouldn't really bet against them. After watching the first 4 weeks, you're still good with your pick?
Yeah, I have them going to the Super Bowl and beating I remember. I think it was the Saints.
The Saints. They've not looked – they've had some shaky moments, haven't they?
Yeah. And they actually have another hurricane coming in the way.
They do, yeah. Hopefully everything turns out okay with that. We would not want to see a repeat of Katrina for sure.
No.
But the Packers have looked very good. Aaron Rodgers has looked they drafted what was his name? Who did they draft? The quarterback that they drafted?
Jordan Love out of Utah State.
Yeah, they drafted him, and people were saying like, "Oh, Aaron Rodgers is old. He's done." Nope, not the case. No. He's looked this is probably one of his best starts to a season ever, I would think.
Oh yeah, I didn't doubt. I've never doubted Aaron Rodgers for a minute, because that man puts on a show every week, regardless of how many people he has or how little wide receivers the Packers draft.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I think. Was it 2 years ago? I think they started with like 2 running backs at wide receiver, I think, or something like that.
I mean, they have a wide receiver at running back with Aaron Jones, essentially, but
it wasn't a couple of years ago. I think when Ty Montgomery was still there.
I
don't even remember.
He was wide receiver. He was listed.
Yes, that was the game. They've not done him a lot of favors. I mean, they've got some good pieces around him, but. Mm-hmm. Is Jimmy Graham still there?
I believe so. I think he's still there, and then, or is he at Chicago? I can't remember.
I don't know, but Jimmy Graham was a good pickup for them if he's still there. I think. I don't even know. So are you still confident with your Saints pick?
I mean, I'm gonna stick with it. I think Drew Brees has a little bit of magic still left in his career, but they have been getting a lot of injuries.
Yeah,
as many other teams like the Eagles.
You guys have a whole starting lineup injured.
Yeah, our practice squad is our wide receiver core. Same with our offensive line. No problems.
You might find the next big thing out of your practice squad, maybe. Hopefully not. Hopefully not next week though.
Hey, Travis Fulgham out of ODU pulled out a miraculous catch to win it.
There you go. Oh, jeez. All right, you heard it here first. Chiefs to repeat over to Saints. John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll get the link to your sports blog. It's a Johnny Sports blog in the description, and go visit his blog if you're interested in mock drafts or all things sports related. You heard it here first. Bye, everybody.